Welcome back to This is Thailand. Most of the stories we tell on this channel end the same way. The money's gone, the woman's gone. The man is sitting somewhere trying to work out how he got from hopeful to hollowed out in 18 months. Those stories are real, and we keep telling them because they keep happening. But every so often, we get something different. A man who came to Thailand carrying real grief, real money, and every reason in the world to make a complete mess of things, and mostly didn't. Night's story belongs to Brendan. He's 61, from Limerick in Ireland. Spent 35 years as a welder and fabricator before he retired. Not a man who talks about himself much, by his own account. But he came to Thailand, and something happened to him here. Not what you'd expect, not what most men experience, and he wanted to talk about it. The danger Brendan faced in Thailand wasn't a scam. It wasn't a bar girl or a business partner or a visa disaster. It was something quieter than any of that. Something a lot of men don't see until it's already swallowed them whole. This one's going to stick with you. Here's his story, in his own words. My name's Brendan. I'm 61 years of age. I worked in a fabrication yard just outside Limerick for 35 years. Structural steel mostly. Cutting, fitting, grinding, welding. Heavy industrial work. Not glamorous, but it suited me. I'm a man who likes knowing whether something fits or it doesn't. Whether a joint holds or it won't. There's a clarity to that kind of work that I found, I don't know. Reliable. The right word holds up when you put weight on it. I retired 2 years ago. Retired 2 years ago. Retired is one way to put it. I should probably explain my read first. We were married 27 years. She was from Ennis originally, moved to Limerick when she was 22, and we met at a mutual friend's wedding, which is the most ordinary origin story imaginable, and I find I don't mind that. We had a house in Doradoyle, semi-detached, small garden. Out the back she kept better than I ever would have, 2 kids. Oife, who's in Toronto now. Ciaran, who's in Galway and doesn't ring enough, but that's another story entirely. We had plans, not big plans. We weren't the type. We had plans, not big plans. Doing a proper tour around the West. Kerry, Donegal, maybe up to the Antrim coast. And after that, maybe somewhere warm. Portugal came up a few times. We never went. We kept saying, next year. There are only so many next years in a life, and you don't know that until the counting stops. The Tuesday in March. I've said this sentence enough times now that it comes out flat, which I think is what happens when you repeat something until the edges wear off it. The football was on. Limerick were playing someone, I couldn't tell you who. I don't remember anything about the match. May Reid was in the kitchen. I heard something, not a crash, not a shout, just a sound that was wrong. Wrong enough that I was up before I decided to stand. She was on the floor. The ambulance took 12 minutes. I know because I checked the time when I rang them, and I checked it again when they arrived, and I've checked it many times since, though I don't know what I'm expecting the number to become. 12 minutes. It didn't matter. She was gone before they got there. Heart attack, they said. No warning. No history. These things happen. I don't have much more to say about that part .1/1000 not being evasive. There are some things that don't get better for being described in detail. What I will say is that the house was wrong afterward, the specific wrongness of a space that was built for 2 people and now holds 1. Every room was wrong, the kitchen especially. I stopped going in there, except when I had to. I held on for 18 months. I don't know why 18 months specifically. There was no logic to it, no decision made. I just woke up one morning and knew I was going to sell it. Rang the estate agent that week. It went for a bit more than I'd expected, which surprised me and then made me feel guilty for being surprised. Which is the sort of circular thinking you get into when you're sleeping badly and not talking to anyone about any of it. I put $15,000 in the bank, moved into a rented flat off the Ennis Road, small place, clean enough, a window that looked out at another window. I sat in it for several months doing not very much. Oife rang from Toronto every Sunday, which I appreciated but also found exhausting in a way I couldn't explain to her. Ciaran rang less. That was fine too, in its way. I was 59 years old, and the thing I'd organized my life around for 27 years was gone, and the thing I'd organized my working life around for 35 years before that was also finished, and I had no idea what any of the remaining time was supposed to be for. That's not self-pity. I want to be clear about that. It's just an accurate description of where I was. I found Thailand at 2 in the morning, the way I suspect a lot of men my age find it. I wasn't looking for it specifically. I was doing what you do at 2 in the morning, when sleep isn't coming, reading things on the internet that don't require you to feel anything, forums about cost of living abroad, retirement visa requirements, Whether a man with a certain amount of savings could live somewhere warm and cheap without running out of money before he ran out of life. I looked at Spain first. Portugal, Malta. They all came up. Cheaper than Ireland, yes, but not dramatically so. And this is going to sound odd, but it's true, they were full of Irish people. You go to the Algarve and half the bars could be in Mullingar with better weather. I wasn't looking to recreate what I had. I was looking for something that didn't remind me of what I'd lost. I needed distance, not just the kilometers, the distance of everything being different. Different sounds, different food, different problems. Thailand kept appearing in the searches, Chiang Mai specifically. Someone had written the blog, fairly practical, no romanticism to it, which I appreciated, about retiring there on a modest income. The numbers made sense when I put them in a spreadsheet, which I did, at 3 in the morning, like the deeply exciting person I had become. I watched a few YouTube channels. Some of them were warning videos. Stories of men who'd gone to Thailand and had their savings taken off them by various means. I watched enough of those to have some sense of the risks. I thought knowing the risks would protect me. I wasn't entirely wrong about that. I wasn't entirely right either, but we'll get to that. The decision to book the flight happened the way the decision to sell the house happened, not as a moment of resolve, but as a slow accumulation. One day I was looking at it, the next, I'd done it. Economy class, Bangkok, November. I told nobody for 2 weeks. When I told Aoife, she said, "Dad, are you sure? Are you all right?" I told her I was grand. I wasn't sure whether that was true, but I was getting on a plane either way, so it hardly mattered. I didn't know what I was going to find. I had an idea, from the reading and the videos and the forums, but an idea is a different thing from a place. Thailand was a word on a spreadsheet. I was about to find out what it actually was. I packed practical clothes, work trousers, good boots, a waterproof. Aoife sent me a WhatsApp the night before I flew that said just, "Don't be daft, Dad." I sent back a thumbs up, which is about as demonstrative as I get. That was November 2022. I was 59 years old. I had $25,000 in a bank account I didn't quite know what to do with, and I was going to Thailand. I should probably say at this point that I had no idea what was coming. But that would be a lie, because I'd watched enough of these videos to have some idea. I just thought I was different. I was. Mostly. Not entirely. We'll get into that. Bangkok hit me before I'd cleared the terminal. Not the heat. I'd read about the heat. I was prepared for the heat. I was the noise, the sheer layered density of it. Horns and engines and someone's music bleeding from a shop doorway, and a woman behind a counter shouting into a phone, and the overhead announcements in Thai and then English, and then what I think was Japanese. All of it at once, all of it at full volume. One stood outside Subarnabhumi with my one bag and my waterproof and thought, right. This is a different thing entirely. I'd booked 3 nights in Bangkok, figured I should see the capital before heading north. That was the sensible plan, and I'm generally a sensible man. I lasted 2.5 days. It's not that Bangkok is unpleasant. Parts of it are extraordinary. I took the BTS up to Chatuchak on the second morning and walked around for 2 hours in something close to a trance. The scale of it, the color, the smell of mango sticky rice from a cart near the north entrance. An old man selling something I couldn't identify out of a basket who looked at me with complete indifference, which I found more welcoming than any amount of false friendliness. Bangkok has its own version of beauty, but it's a city that moves at a frequency I couldn't match, and every doorway had someone in it ready to redirect me somewhere I hadn't asked to go. Tuk-tuk? Where you go. Good price for you. I'm sure it was a good price. I said no thank you and kept walking. What I remember most about Bangkok is the overhead power lines. They're everywhere. Thick black cables strung between poles at every angle, looping and crossing. A kind of organized chaos that nobody seems to notice because it's just part of the landscape. I found myself looking at them the way I'd have looked at a weld at the yard. Functional, probably. Wouldn't pass inspection back home, but functional. There are worse things than functional. There are worse things than functional. On the third morning, I went to Hua Lam Phung Station and bought a ticket on the overnight train to Chiang Mai. This was also from a forum recommendation. Someone had written about the train journey in a way that made it sound like the more honest introduction to Thailand, less curated than a flight. I'm not usually a man for poetic notions about train journeys, but it turned out to be correct. I had a sleeper berth. The train left at 6 in the evening and pulled into Chiang Mai the following morning. I ate a meal from a vendor who came through the carriage, chak, fried rice with a fried egg on top, in a little box, about 60 baht, which is less than €2, which I noted with the quiet satisfaction of a man checking a measurement. I watched the city dissolve into dark countryside. Shock. Shock may well for a man who hadn't been sleeping well for 18 months. Chiang Mai in the early morning is monks and mist and the smell of something frying from a stall outside the station. I took a Sondae, a red shared taxi, open back. You flag it down and knock on the side when you want out, to the apartment I'd arranged before flying. Niman Hayman area, which the forum posts called Niman, which turned out to be the right sort of neighborhood for someone who wanted quiet without being isolated. Wide enough streets for a man to walk on. Coffee shops. A market 2 minutes from my front door that opened at 6 in the morning and was finished by 9:30. The apartment was $8,500 a month. That apartment was $8,500 a month. I want you to hold that number for a moment because it matters to how the rest of this story goes. In Limerick, I've been paying $950 a month for a flat that was smaller and had a worse view. 2 rooms, clean, a small kitchen I actually used. A balcony I didn't use yet. A spirit house in the corner of the compound outside, a small ornate structure like a miniature temple on a pedestal with flowers and little offerings around it. Incense burning. I'd read about spirit houses. Knowing about something and seeing it daily are different things. I found I liked it. A small acknowledgement that a place has history you're arriving into rather than creating. The first week I mostly walked. I'm a man who processes things by moving through them. At the yard, I'd walk the floor when something needed thinking through. Chiang Mai suited that. The old city is ringed by a moat, an actual moat, which still takes some getting used to. Like someone left a medieval feature in the middle of a modern city, and everyone decided it was fine, and I walked it most mornings before the heat became serious. Temples everywhere. Wat Shetty Luong, Wat Pra Singh. I'm not a religious man, not particularly, but there's something about a space that was built for sitting quietly and that suits me. The mountains were there on clear mornings. Doi Suthip, mostly hidden in cloud, but on good days you could see it properly from the right street. I noticed I kept looking for it. By the end of the first week, a man knocked on my apartment door. His name was Dave. English. Retired civil servant, he said, though he had the manner of a man who'd been middle management rather than anything sharper. He'd seen me moving in and wanted to be welcoming. Friendly enough. He told me about a Tuesday quiz night at a place called Shamrocks on Niman Soy 7 Irish-themed bar, he said. Good crake, nice bunch of lads, I'd enjoy it. I said I'd think about it. And I did think about it. And then I went, because I'd been in Chiang Mai a week, and I hadn't spoken more than 20 words to any human being. And that seemed like it might be getting slightly not ideal. Shamrocks was Irish the way an airport lounge is Irish. Some green paint. A Guinness sign that had no business being there since they didn't serve Guinness, just Chang and Leo in those tall 1-liter towers, which is fine, I have nothing against Chang, but it wasn't what the sign was suggesting. A television in the corner showing English football on delay. Dave introduced me to 5 men around a table. Their names I'll spare you, but their ages ranged from mid-50s to about 70. All long-term residents, all Western, within about 4 minutes of my sitting down, very fluent in complaint. The traffic was worse than it used to be. The immigration office had changed the rules again. Some bloke's Thai girlfriend had bought herself a motorbike with his money without asking. Thailand used to be better. Thailand used to be cheaper. Thailand used to be more authentic. Thailand, and this was a genuinely held position, stated without irony, was being ruined by too many foreigners coming over and not understanding the culture. I drank 2 Changs. I answered 3 quiz questions, the capital of Peru, the year of the first moon landing, and the name of the actress in some film they'd all seen that I hadn't. I got all 3 right. Nobody seemed particularly pleased. I didn't go back. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to sound contemptuous of those men. I've thought about it since, and I think what I was looking at around that table was grief wearing a different outfit. Every one of them had come to Thailand because something at home hadn't worked, a marriage, a career, a version of themselves they couldn't sustain. And they'd arrived here and found each other and built a structure that was familiar enough to be comfortable and foreign enough to feel like an adventure. And then gradually the comfort took over, and the adventure became routine, and now here they were, spending 60 or 70,000 baht a month, that's 1,055 T to 1,800, to maintain a life that was basically the English Midlands with more sunshine and cheaper beer. I understood the impulse. I want to be honest about that. The pull of it. I'd come 12,000 kilometers to find something different, and the easiest thing in the world would have been to sit in that bar every Tuesday and let the weeks go by. There would have been comfort in it, there would have been company, but I hadn't come 12,000 kilometers to sit in a room full of men complaining about the same things in a different accent. I'd done the reading. I knew what happened to men who disappeared into the bubble. 5 years in, and 30 words of Thai, and a mounting resentment about a country they'd chosen to live in, but never quite arrived in. I wasn't going to be that, or I was going to try not to be that, which turned out to be more complicated than it sounds, though not in the way I was expecting. So I made a decision, not a dramatic one. More like the kind of decision you make at the yard when you realize the approach you've been using isn't going to get the joint right. You stop. You think about it. You try something else. I was going to learn some Thai. I want to be clear about why, because it wasn't for any noble reason. It wasn't about cultural respect, though I suppose that came later. It was practical. I was going to be living here, and I didn't want to be the man who'd been living here 5 years and still needed a translated menu. I'd spent 3.5 decades in an environment where not knowing something was a liability. You don't know how a piece of steel behaves under load, someone gets hurt. I didn't see why this should be different. I found the tutor through a notice board at Chiang Mai University. Actual paper notice board, actual paper notices pinned to it. I'd walked past the campus on one of my mornings out and went in on impulse. Most of the notices were in Thai, which at that point was still just shapes to me, but there were a few, in English, accommodation, translation services, one offering Thai language lessons for foreigners, handwritten with a name and a phone number. Kun Somjai, retired schoolteacher. I rang the number that afternoon. He was 68 years old, small, precise in his movements, with reading glasses he pushed up onto his forehead when he wasn't using them and then couldn't find. We met twice a week at his home near the superhighway, a tidy house with a small garden and a large bookshelf and a cat that had no interest in me whatsoever. He charged $300 an hour. About 8. I mentioned the price not to make a point about cheapness, but because it was less than I used to spend on tea and a roll at the yard on a Friday morning, and I found that clarifying. The first lesson he had me say, "Sawadi crap," about 14 times, until I stopped flattening the tone on the second syllable. I thought I had it right by the 4th attempt. I did not have it right by the 4th attempt. He let me continue thinking I had it right until about the 10th attempt. Then he said very evenly, "You are saying something slightly different to what you think you are saying." I appreciated that. The honesty. I'd worked for 35 years alongside men who'd tell you straight when a weld was substandard, and I'd always thought that was more respectful than silence. Kun Somjai operated the same way. He didn't tell me I was doing well when I wasn't. He was professionally unimpressed with my tones for about 6 weeks, and then one afternoon he said, "Better." And I felt something close to the satisfaction I used to feel when a complex joint passed inspection. The thing about Thai that nobody quite explains to you is that it's not just vocabulary and grammar. It's the relationship between sounds and meaning that works differently to anything in your previous experience. Limerick Irish English is not a tonal language. I grew up ironing variation out of vowels, not using it to carry meaning. The same syllable in Thai can mean 5 different things depending on pitch, mid, low, falling, high, rising, and the only way to learn it is to let yourself be wrong repeatedly in front of someone patient enough to correct you without embarrassing you. Kun Somjai was that person. He also occasionally found my errors funny in a way he didn't try to conceal. The first time I accidentally told a market vendor something I definitely hadn't meant to tell them, I won't specify what, but Kun Somjai laughed when I described it, which was the first time I'd seen him laugh. I decided that being a source of mild amusement was an acceptable cost of learning. The eating was a separate project, running in parallel. I stopped going anywhere with an English menu for breakfast. The market near my apartment had a woman who sold joke, rice porridge, from 6 in the morning, thick and hot with a soft-boiled egg and something crispy on top that I eventually identified as fried garlic. Frateria Bowl.11 went most days. We had no shared language for the first 3 weeks. I pointed at what I wanted and she filled the bowl and took my coins, and that was the whole transaction. Around week 4, I tried the Thai for delicious. Shuza. And she smiled and said something back that I didn't catch, but the tone of it was approving. Small victory. I kept a note of small victories. You have to. I ate things I couldn't identify. Some of them I went back for, some of them I didn't, but not for any dramatic reason. I just preferred the others. I had a bowl of tom yum at a place near Wat Swan Dock one evening, small plastic table, 2 plastic stools, a gas burner on the counter, a woman of about 70 who watched me eat with the expression of someone observing a child attempt, something they've been told is difficult. The soup was extraordinary. Hot and sour and something else underneath. A complexity I couldn't account for and didn't need to. I went back the following week. She didn't acknowledge that I'd been before. I found this perfect. The Santeyu incident was month 3. I was trying to get to the Saturday market on Niman Road, which involved a Songthae U heading south. I flagged the wrong one. Realized fairly quickly that we were going in a direction that didn't match what I'd intended, but by the time I'd worked this out, I didn't know which stop to get off at, and in any case, the sensible thing seemed to be to see where it went. It went to Hangdong, about 20 kilometers south. A market day at a temple complex, Wat Phra, that's Sai Chom Thong, though I didn't know that at the time, I found out later. Mostly Thai families, a few stalls selling merit-making supplies, flowers, incense, small gold leaf for pressing onto Buddha images, the smell of jasmine garlands and something frying in oil and incense all layered together in the heat. A monk walking slowly along a covered walkway who didn't look up. An old woman selling something wrapped in banana leaves who charged me 15 and watched with interest to see if I'd eat it correctly, which I mostly did. I sat on a low wall near one of the temple buildings for maybe an hour. Pigeons. Children running. The sound of a bell somewhere. A man asleep on a bench in the shade who nobody was bothering. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, and I realized, sitting there, that this was the first time since Mary died that I wasn't performing. Not performing sadness for the people at home who needed to see it. Not performing capability for Aoife on the Sunday calls. Not performing capability for Aoife on the Sunday calls. The internal voice that kept taking stock and assessing whether I was handling things adequately. I was just sitting by a temple wall in a place I hadn't intended to be, eating something I hadn't expected to eat, not understanding most of what was happening around me. It wasn't happiness. I want to be careful not to call it that, but it was something. The first something in a while that felt like it was actually happening to me rather than around me. I got a Songthae back to Niman from the main road, in 40, correct direction this time. Stopped at the 7-Eleven near my apartment for a bottle of water and a bag of those little crackers they sell by the register, the prawn-flavored ones. Went home. Made a note of my phone. Go back to Hangdong. The shop had no sign in English. That was partly why I went in. It was on a narrow soi off Niman Road, about 2 streets back from my apartment. The kind of street that exists between the streets you actually mean to be on. A sewing machine visible through the open doorway. Bolts of fabric stacked against one wall. A small electric fan oscillating slowly on a shelf. I'd walked past it maybe a dozen times and registered it without registering it, the way you register most things when you're still learning what a place contains. I had a pair of work trousers that needed hemming. I bought them in Limerick before leaving, and they'd always been slightly too long. One of those things you put off dealing with until the irritation exceeds the effort required. I went in. The woman behind the counter was maybe 47, 48, small, with her hair pinned up and reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She was working on something at the machine and looked up without particular surprise. The way people who work with their hands look up from work, not interrupted, just pausing. I held up the trousers and mimed a hemming gesture that I'm fairly sure communicated nothing whatsoever. She looked at the trousers, then at me. Then she said something in Thai, and I caught about a third of it, which, at that point in my language lessons, was better than I'd been doing the week before. Enough to understand she was asking how short. I showed her with my hands. She nodded, took the trousers, measured something with a practiced movement and said a number. 80 baht. About refty too. I said that was fine, using the Thai, which came out adequately. She gave me a look that was not quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it. I said I'd come back the next day. Her name, well, the name she used, was Noi. I found that out on the second visit, when I came to collect the trousers, and she had a small notepad where she'd written the customer name and what had been done. And she showed me the line where she'd written the anglicized version of it, rather than attempt my surname, which I can't fault her for. The trousers were done perfectly. Exactly the length. I checked the stitching out of habit, and it was clean all the way round. I went back 3 weeks later with a shirt that needed a button replaced. This was not a shirt that urgently needed a button replaced. I want to be honest about that. The button was missing, but I had other shirts. We talked a bit more this time. Her English was limited, and my Thai was limited, and there was a lot of gap filling with gestures, and the occasional word pulled from a phone dictionary. But the shape of a conversation was there. She'd been running the shop herself for 4 years. Her husband had passed away, she said it simply. The same flatness I'd learned to use when talking about May Raid, the practiced version of the fact. She had a daughter studying in Chiang Mai. Business was adequate. She didn't seem to need me to respond to any of this with anything more than acknowledgement, which suited me. I went back again after that. And again after that. Each time with something that needed minor work, and eventually without any pretense of having something that needed work, just to eat. There was a noodle place about 50 meters from her shop, a few tables outside, a pot of broth that seemed to be permanently on the boil, A handwritten menu I was now capable of reading with some accuracy. We went there twice, then a few more times. We ordered separately and paid separately, and I don't think either of us was operating under any particular illusions about what this was or wasn't. She found my Thai attempts more amusing than impressive, which, as I've said, I took as a good sign. There's a kind of flattery that comes from people being too encouraging about your language attempts, and it tells you nothing useful. Noi would occasionally correct my pronunciation with the same directness as kun somjai, which meant I was getting consistent feedback from two sources, which any fabricator will tell you is more reliable than one. I want to be careful here, because I know what channel this is. I know what you're expecting. I wasn't looking for this. That's true. But I also wasn't going to refuse something real because I'd spent enough time on forums reading about things that were fake. That would be a different kind of foolishness. So, month 4 of knowing Noi, we'd eaten together maybe 8 or 9 times by this point. Nothing had been declared or decided. It was the kind of thing that both people understand without the other one having to say it, which I think is partly a Thai preference for not making things explicit before they need to be, and partly just how things develop between two people who are both, by nature, fairly careful. She mentioned the roof on a Wednesday evening at the noodle place. Her mother's house in Lampang, that's about 2 hours south of Chiang Mai by bus, needed significant repair before the rainy season came in. The roof had been patching and patching for 2 years, and it had reached the point where patching wasn't going to be enough. She mentioned it the way you mention something that is a problem without asking directly for it to be solved, obliquely, as information rather than request. No eye contact held too long, no emotional escalation. Just the fact of it, set down on the table between us. She said the cost would be about $85,000. That's roughly $2,200. I didn't say anything immediately. I asked a few practical questions, the type of roof, whether she'd had someone look at it, and she answered them, and we finished eating, and I said I'd need to think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I did not ask Dave. This is important. Dave's view of Thai women requesting money would have been predictable, useless, and wrong in the specific way that generalized bitterness is always wrong. Instead, I mentioned it to Wichai, an accountant I'd met through Kun Sumyai, a Thai man about my own age who had no relationship with Noi, and no reason to give me anything but a straight answer. I explained the situation. Wichai listened. Then he said, yes, this is normal. Eldest daughter. Widowed mother. House that needs repair. This is a real obligation, not a story. He said some men give in this situation and some don't, but it is a genuine expectation, and some don't, but it is a genuine expectation, not a performance. I sat with that for the rest of the 2 weeks. Here's the thing about due diligence. I spent 35 years in an environment where you checked your work before you committed to it, not because you didn't trust yourself, but because the cost of a mistake was structural. A bad weld doesn't announce itself until load is applied. By then you can't undo it. 2 weeks was what I needed. To check the information. To be honest with myself about whether I was being taken advantage of or whether I was being asked to participate, as a man with means, in something that was genuinely needed. I decided it was genuinely needed. I told Noi I would help with the roof. And then I said the part that felt important to say clearly, that I was glad to help her mother, and that I needed her to understand this was the kind of help I could offer once, not a pattern I was signing up for. That I wasn't a solution to every problem that came along. She received this without any reaction I could easily read, not hurt, not grateful in a performed way, not resentful. She just nodded and said she understood. And then she said thank you, in Thai, simply. That response, that absence of theater, was the most reassuring thing that had happened to me in 14 months in Thailand. I transferred the $85,000 the following week. The roof was repaired. Noi showed me a photo of it on her phone about 3 weeks later. New corrugated sheets, clean and level. Her mother was visible at the edge of the frame, small and indistinct. I looked at the photo and thought, yes, that's a roof that'll hold. The shop had no sign in English. That was partly why I went in. It was on a narrow soy-off Niman Road, about 2 streets back from my apartment, the kind of street that exists between the streets you actually mean to be on. A sewing machine visible through the open doorway. Bolts of fabric stacked against one wall, a small electric fan oscillating slowly on a shelf. I'd walked past it maybe a dozen times and registered it without registering it, the way you register most things when you're still learning what a place contains. I had a pair of work trousers that needed hemming. I'd bought them in Limerick before leaving, and they'd always been slightly too long, one of those things you put off dealing with until the irritation exceeds the effort required. I went in. The woman behind the counter was maybe 47, 48. Small, with her hair pinned up and reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She was working on something at the machine and looked up without particular surprise. The way people who work with their hands look up from work, not interrupted, just pausing. I held up the trousers and mimed a hemming gesture that I'm fairly sure communicated nothing whatsoever. She looked at the trousers, then at me. Then she said something in Thai and I caught about a third of it, which at that point in my language lessons was better than I'd been doing the week before. Enough to understand she was asking how short. I showed her with my hands. She nodded, took the trousers, measured something with a practice movement, and said a number. 80 baht. About 2. I said that was fine, using the Thai, which came out adequately. She gave me a look that was not quite a smile, but was something adjacent to it. I said I'd come back the next day. Her name, well, the name she used was Noi. I found that out on the second visit when I came to collect the trousers, and she had a small notepad where she'd written the customer name and what had been done, and she showed me the line where she'd written the anglicized version of it, rather than attempt my surname, which I can't fault her for. The trousers were done perfectly, exactly the length. I checked the stitching out of habit, and it was clean all the way round. I went back 3 weeks later with a shirt that needed a button replaced. This was not a shirt that urgently needed a button replaced. This was not a shirt that urgently needed a button replaced. The button was missing, but I had other shirts. We talked a bit more this time. Her English was limited, and my Thai was limited, and there was a lot of gap-filling with gestures and the occasional word pulled from a phone dictionary. But the shape of the conversation was there. She'd been running the shop herself for 4 years. Her husband had passed away. She said it simply. The same flatness I'd learned to use when talking about my read, the practiced version of the fact. She had a daughter studying in Chiang Mai. Business was adequate. She didn't seem to need me to respond to any of this with anything more than acknowledgement, which suited me. I went back again after that, and again after that. Each time with something that needed minor work, and eventually without any pretense of having something that needed work just to eat. There was a noodle place about 50 meters from her shop, a few tables outside, a pot of broth that seemed to be permanently on the boil, a handwritten menu I was now capable of reading with some accuracy. We went there twice, then a few more times. We ordered separately and paid separately, and I don't think either of us was operating under any particular illusions about what this was or wasn't. She found my Thai attempts more amusing than impressive, which, as I've said, I took as a good sign. There's a kind of flattery that comes from people being too encouraging about your language attempts, and it tells you nothing useful. Noi would occasionally correct my pronunciation with the same directness as kun somjai, which meant I was getting consistent feedback from 2 sources, which any fabricator will tell you is more reliable than one. I want to be careful here, because I know what channel this is. I know what you're expecting. I wasn't looking for this, that's true. But I also wasn't going to refuse something real, because I'd spent enough time on forums reading about things that were fake. That would be a different kind of foolishness. So, month 4 of knowing Noi. We'd eaten together maybe 8 or 9 times by this point. Nothing had been declared or decided. It was the kind of thing that both people understand without the other one having to say it, which I think is partly a Thai preference for not making things explicit before they need to be, and partly just how things develop between 2 people who are both, by nature, fairly careful. She mentioned the roof on a Wednesday evening at the noodle place. Her mother's house in Lampang, that's about 2 hours south of Chiang Mai by bus, needed significant repair before the rainy season came in. The roof had been patching and patching for 2 years, and it had reached the point where patching wasn't going to be enough. She mentioned it the way you mention something that is a problem without asking directly for it to be solved, obliquely, as information rather than request, no eye contact held too long, no emotional escalation, just the fact of it, set down on the table between us. She said the cost would be about 85,000. That's roughly 2,200. I didn't say anything immediately. I asked a few practical questions, the type of roof, whether she'd had someone look at it, and she answered them, and we finished eating, and I said I'd need to think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I did not ask Dave. This is important. Dave's view of Thai women requesting money would have been predictable, useless, and wrong in the specific way that generalized bitterness is always wrong. Instead, I mentioned it to Wichai, an accountant I'd met through Kun Somjai, a Thai man about my own age who had no relationship with Noi and no reason to give me anything but a straight answer. I explained the situation. Wichai listened. Then he said, yes, this is normal. Eldest daughter, widowed mother. House that needs repair. This is a real obligation, not a story. He said some men give in this situation and some don't, But it is a genuine expectation, not a performance. I sat with that for the rest of the 2 weeks. Here's the thing about due diligence. I spent 35 years in an environment where you checked your work before you committed to it, not because you didn't trust yourself, but because the cost of a mistake was structural. A bad weld doesn't announce itself until load is applied. By then you can't undo it. 2 weeks was what I needed. To check the information. To be honest with myself about whether I was being taken advantage of, or whether I was being asked to participate, as a man with means, in something that was genuinely needed. I decided it was the second thing. I told Noi I would help with the roof. And then I said the part that felt important to say clearly, that I was glad to help her mother, and that I needed her to understand this was the kind of help I could offer once, not a pattern I was signing up for. That I wasn't a solution to every problem that came along. She received this without any reaction I could easily read. Not hurt, not grateful in a performed way, not resentful. She just nodded and said she understood. And then she said thank you, in Thai, simply. That response, that absence of theater, was the most reassuring thing that had happened to me in 14 months in Thailand. I transferred the $85,000 the following week. The roof was repaired. Noi showed me a photo of it on her phone about 3 weeks later. New corrugated sheets, clean and level. Her mother was visible at the edge of the frame, small and indistinct. I looked at the photo and thought, yes, that's a roof that'll hold. Around month 6, I noticed I was doing everything right. Language lessons twice a week, continuing. My Thai was functional now, not fluent, nowhere near, but I could manage a market, navigate the immigration office without assistance, have a basic conversation with Noi that didn't require a phone dictionary every third sentence. Visa paperwork was in order. I transitioned off the tourist entry and onto a non-OA retirement extension, the one that requires you to be over 50 and show either $800,000 in a Thai bank account or proof of sufficient monthly income. I'd moved $800,000 of my savings into a Capricorn bank account, about $20,700, which is what the immigration rules require you to park and leave there. It's your money, you can access it in an emergency, but the balance has to be maintained. I did this through an agent which I recommended, not the one Dave uses. The fee was $1,900, about $2,900, about 25 Thai. No complications. Annual renewal, 90-day reporting to the Chiang Mai immigration office on Mahidol Road. Straightforward if you know what you're doing, and catastrophic if you don't. Finances were intact. Living costs running around $25,000 a month, $650, including the apartment, food, transport, language lessons. Less than I'd spent in Limerick on considerably less. My $5,000 minus the $800,000 minus the $800,000 in the Thai account, and the first several months of living costs, was sitting where I'd put it. The roof had cost $2,200. I'd thought about that expenditure carefully, and I didn't regret it. Relationship with Noi was proceeding at its own pace. We ate together twice a week, roughly. We'd been to the Sunday walking market on Walleye Road together once. She bought fabric, I bought a grilled corn on the cob and ate it while walking, which she found somewhat undignified, which I found funny. She hadn't asked me for anything since the roof. I hadn't expected her to. But I noticed I was watching for it, which told me something about myself that wasn't entirely flattering. So, everything right, by the metrics. And, somewhere around month 6, I noticed something else. Something underneath all that correct behavior, quiet and persistent. The way a structural issue in a building will show itself, eventually not as a collapse, but as a hairline crack in a corner where two walls meet. I hadn't grieved. I'd been moving too carefully, filling every day with purpose. The lessons, the walking, the eating deliberately in places without English menus, the small cumulative project of building a life here from scratch. And all of it was real. I'm not saying it wasn't, but I'd been using it. Using the busyness of becoming competent somewhere new as a reason to not sit still long enough to feel anything that wasn't forward motion. Thailand was far enough that nobody expected anything from me. I'd wanted that. I'd chosen it specifically. But I'd taken the freedom and turned it into another kind of performance. The performance of a man who has things in hand. A man processing his situation constructively, nobody to tell it to, so I told it to myself, and I believed it, and it was partially true, and partially not. Aoife rang in month 7. She was visiting Limerick from Toronto, her birthday, her aunt's house, a few days home. She asked if I'd come back for it. I booked the flight the same day. I landed in Dublin on a Tuesday morning, drove to Limerick in a rental car, and did the thing I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I drove to the house in Dordoyle to someone else lives there now. A young couple, I think. There were bikes in the small garden that Mary kept better than I ever would have. A different color on the front door. Small signs of a different color on the front door. Small signs of a different life being lived there, which is as it should be. I parked at the end of the road and sat in the car for a few minutes. I didn't try to go in. I didn't try to do anything. I just looked at the house and thought, she lived there for 23 years. That's done now. Not a breakdown. Not a revelation. Just an acknowledgement that had been outstanding for too long, finally made. I spent 3 days in Limerick, saw Oife, saw my friend Seamus, who'd been ringing every month or so to check in. Didn't see Ciaran, who was in Galway and couldn't make the trip, which was fine. It was fine. It was fine. The conversation with Oife was the first honest one we'd had since Mayred died. We'd been managing each other for 2 years, her managing me by not asking too much, me managing her by performing adequacy. Somewhere over a meal in a restaurant near the river, she asked me directly, "Are you happy, Dad?" I thought about it. I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm present. That's further along than I was." She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Okay." And that was it. That was the whole conversation, really, and it was enough. I flew back to Chiang Mai 10 days after I'd left. The heat hit me coming out of the terminal, and I thought, right, this is where I am now. That thought had a different quality to it than it had the first time. Something was slightly different on the return. I was less defended, less invested in the performance of managing. I went to Kun Somjai's house the following Tuesday, and we had the lesson, and he corrected my tones, and I made an error that he found amusing, and I found that I didn't mind any of it, in the slightly braced way I'd been not minding things. I just didn't mind it. So, 14 months in. For anyone watching this who's thinking about numbers, here's where I actually am. Rent over 14 months, roughly 3,080, living costs, food, transport, utilities, the occasional chang at a bar that isn't Shamrocks, about 9,000. Language lessons with Kun Somjai, 800. The roof, 2,200. Travel, including the flight back to Ireland and getting around Thailand on occasional weekends, 1,200. Miscellaneous, everything else, 1,200. Visa costs and the agent, 200. Total spent, around 200. I have 227,000 remaining, plus the 800,000 sitting in the Thai bank account that's parked for visa purposes. I'm not rich, I'm not comfortable in the way that some men come here being comfortable, but I'm not running out of money. And I know exactly where every euro of it went, which for a man who spent 35 years watching whether metal met specification is the only way I was ever going to be able to sleep. You watching this channel because you want to know what can go wrong. That's why anyone watches. The disasters, the scams, the men who came here with everything and left with nothing. I understand that. I watched enough of these videos myself before I got on the plane. I'm not sure my story is one of those. I haven't lost everything, nobody took my savings. I wasn't conned by a woman half my age who was sending my money to a boyfriend in Pattaya. I'm 14 months in, I have most of what I came with, and I'm still here. Whether that makes me smart or just fortunate, I honestly don't know. Both, maybe. Or neither, maybe. Or neither, maybe I just haven't been here long enough yet for things to go wrong. I think about that sometimes. I try to be honest with myself about it. But here's what I can tell you. The things that kept me from making the obvious mistakes. Not rules, just the things that actually worked. Learn some Thai before you land. Not a lot. 20 words, 30 not, to impress anyone. Because it changes what you can access, and what can access you. Last month I was at Wat Suan Dock at dawn. I go there sometimes on the mornings when I wake up at 5 and can't get back to sleep. And there was an elderly monk sitting at the edge of the courtyard. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. My Thai was adequate enough. His English was none. I couldn't have told you afterward exactly what we'd covered. His time in the robes, something about the trees, something about patience. I don't know what it meant yet, but it meant something. And I couldn't have had it in English. The English version would have been me nodding at a monk who nodded back, and we'd have both gone home having experienced a pleasant nothing. Don't eat where there's an English menu in the window, not every day. The food is genuinely better where there isn't one, and over a year the money you save is real money. I spend roughly 150 to 200 on a good breakfast, that's under 5. I know men here who are spending 350 on eggs and toast at the same expat cafe every morning because it feels like a hotel buffet and reminds them of somewhere familiar. Over a year, that's a meaningful difference. Over 5 years, it's a significant one. Don't join the nationality WhatsApp group in your first month. Give yourself 30 days to find out what Thailand actually is before other people who haven't fully arrived here tell you what to think of it. You'll still find the group eventually. By then, you'll have more sense of what's useful in it and what isn't. If a woman tells you her family needs money, and this will happen one way or another, and it doesn't mean what you think it means either way, don't ask Dave. Don't ask any expat. Ask a Thai person with no stake in your decision. This is the most important one. The expat community, even the well-meaning parts of it, has absorbed so much bitterness about this subject that it can't give you a straight answer anymore. Which eye give me a straight answer anymore? Get a which eye. Don't move in with anyone in the first year. Not because Thai women are dangerous. Some are, some aren't, same as everywhere else, because you're not stable yet and you don't know that yet. At 12 months in, you think you know who you are in this new place. You mostly don't. You know who you've decided to perform being. Wait until those are closer to the same thing. Keep one person at home who'll tell you when you're being an Egypt. Someone who knew you before. My friend Seamus rings every month or so. 3 months in, he asked me straight out, "Are you grand or are you not grand?" Nobody had asked me that in about 2 years. It's a different question to, "Are you okay?" which invites a performance. "Are you grand?" is a question Seamus asks when he already suspects the answer is complicated. It was. Talking to him was worth more than 6 months of forum reading. About the expat bubble. I said earlier I wasn't contemptuous of those men at the Shamrock's table. I want to make sure that comes across properly because I've been thinking about it more since. Those men are not different to me. They came here carrying something heavy. All of them, I bet on it, and they found each other and they built something that held the weight for a while. The problem isn't the bubble. The problem is when the bubble becomes the point. When you stop using it as a temporary shelter and start using it as a permanent address. I nearly did my own version of it. Not the Irish bar version. The solitary version. The man who eats alone in restaurants without English menus and thinks the loneliness is wisdom. I was doing that for about 6 months before I noticed. It took going back to Limerick and standing outside the house and having an honest conversation with my daughter for me to see it. The distance I'd created, the purposeful, structured, careful distance, was real. But it wasn't healing. It was just a different way of not arriving. No, I should tell you where things stand. She hasn't asked me for anything since the roof. That's now 6 months ago. We see each other most weeks. I bought her daughter Pim a second-hand laptop for university last month. A Lenovo. I found it at a shop off Chiang Mai Road. About 7,500, which is under 200. Noi didn't ask me to. I wanted to. Pim is studying business administration in Chiang Mai and was managing with a phone and a borrowed computer, which is not adequate. I thought, I can do something about that. So I did. There's a difference between choosing to give and being extracted from. I think I know the difference. I hope I know the difference. Some days I'm more confident about it than others. We have something, Noi and I. I won't call it more than that yet. I'm not in a rush. That's new for me, and I've noticed it, and I think it means something, though I couldn't tell you exactly what. Thailand didn't fix me. I want to be clear about that. My read is still gone. Chiang Mai doesn't change that. The house in Doyle still has someone else's bikes in the garden and someone else's color on the door, and that's as it should be, and it still sits in my chest the way things sit when they're true and done. But I'm here. I'm present. For a man who went very still for a while, who sat in a flat in Limerick staring at the wall because staying and leaving were both equally wrong. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. That's Brendan's story, and we're grateful he told it. Most of the men who've appeared on This Is Thailand came here and lost something. Money, more often than not. Dignity sometimes. A version of themselves they carried all the way from home. Brendan is something we don't see as often. A man who arrived carrying real grief and real money and the perfectly ordinary capacity to make a complete mess of things, and who didn't, mostly. What separated him from the stories we usually tell isn't luck, though luck played a part. It's that he asked Thai people for advice instead of expats. He moved at the pace things actually needed to move. When Noi's family obligation appeared, and it will appear, in one form or another, for any man who gets close to a Thai woman, he treated it as information rather than a threat or a demand, and he checked it against a source with no stake in the answer. He kept his finances visible to himself, not just in principle, but in practice, in actual numbers. And he stayed in contact with someone back home who'd known him long enough to ask the uncomfortable question. Brendan is 14 months in. We want to be honest with you about that. 14 months is not 5 years. Plenty of men were doing fine at 14 months. The complications, when they come, often arrive later, in year 2, year 3, when the novelty of discipline wears off and the harder tests begin. What Brendan has built, the habits, the language, the relationships with Thai people, rather than only other foreigners, The willingness to sit with something difficult before deciding what it is gives him something real to stand on if things get more complicated. We hope they don't. We'll keep you posted. If you've got a story, a disaster, a close call, something that went right or badly wrong or both at once, reach out. We want to hear it. This is Thailand. Take care of yourselves.